Amara married into the Johnson family with hope, love, and the quiet belief that her marriage would bring happiness and belonging. But from the first day she entered their home, she felt the cold stares and whispered criticisms that made it clear she would never be fully accepted. Her mother-in-law, Mrs. Grace, watched every move she made, judging how she cooked, dressed, or even smiled, while her sisters, Inla, Linda, and Esther, giggled behind her back and sometimes directly to her face, calling her barren, a failure, a woman without worth. Amara tried to stay patient, tried to hold her head high, tried to remind herself that love and kindness could eventually change things. But each day added weight to her chest and fear to her mind, especially when her husband John saw everything and did nothing, claiming that keeping peace in the house was more important than defending her. During family gatherings, she was always seated away from the others, closer to the kitchen, given the smallest portions of food, sometimes entirely ignored, learning to swallow humiliation silently, telling herself that one day her patience and strength would prove her worth. The constant words about being a failure, wasting her husband's time, and bringing shame to the family seeped into her dreams and invaded her waking hours. She woke at night with a racing heart, hearing the insults, the laughter at her expense, and seeing the eyes of her in-laws piercing her with contempt. She kept her suffering private, speaking only when necessary. But inside she felt trapped, powerless, and alone, wondering if she would ever escape the relentless judgment around her. One morning she realized she had missed her period. Her stomach felt strange, her body weak and exhausted. And hope flickered inside her chest, even as fear gripped her, because for years she had been told she was barren, unworthy, and incapable of giving life. She told no one, not John, not her family, not her friends, fearing disbelief, doubt, or more ridicule. Yet inside her body, 3 tiny lives were growing, hidden, while she endured public humiliation. Her in-laws continued their cruel remarks, unaware that she carried not 1 child but 3 triplets who would change everything, and that she also controlled a small hidden fortune she had inherited from her late aunt. Investments no one knew about, a quiet power they could not touch. The tension in the house reached its peak when Mrs. Grace mocked her openly at a family gathering, calling her barren, useless, and undeserving of John, prompting laughter from cousins and distant relatives. And Amara felt her blood boil with fear, humiliation, and a growing determination that she would not remain powerless forever. That night, she went to her room, held her stomach, and whispered to her unborn children that she would protect them, that they would survive, that they would be loved, and that no one's cruel words could diminish their value, making a silent promise to herself that she would reclaim her dignity, her happiness, and one day show those who humiliated her the cost of underestimating her strength. Unaware that their cruelty had already sown the seeds of a future in which Amara would rise triumphant. With her triplets and her hidden fortune, stronger than they had ever imagined, Amara's days grew heavier as the months passed, with her in-laws continuing to mock her in subtle ways and open humiliations. Her mother-in-law, Mrs. Grace, constantly criticized how she cooked, how she dressed, and even the way she laughed, saying she would never be worthy of her husband John if she did not give him children soon. Her sisters-in-law Linda and Esther whispered cruelly behind her back, sometimes directly to her face, calling her barren, a failure, a woman without purpose. Even in moments when she smiled, trying to hide her fear and shame, she felt the weight of their judgment pressing on her chest, crushing her spirit slowly. John saw everything but remained silent, claiming that peace in the household was more important than defending her. And each time, Amara tried to speak to him, to ask why he did not intervene, he only looked away, avoiding her eyes, leaving her alone to carry the humiliation. At night, Amara would cry quietly in her room, clutching her stomach, aware that her body was changing in ways no one suspected, that inside her 3 tiny lives were growing, hidden from the eyes of those who scorned her. She thought about the fortune she had inherited quietly from her late aunt, investments that no one in the family knew about, and it gave her a small, secret strength, a reminder that even when everyone doubted her, she held power they could not touch. School runs, market trips, and family visits became exercises in endurance, forcing Amara to hold her head high while listening to whispers and side glances. To laughter aimed directly at her, and to constant comparisons to women who already had children, as if her worth could be measured by how quickly she gave birth. Her heart ached for John too, because she still loved him despite his weakness. And she grieved the marriage they could have had if only respect and kindness had been part of the household. One afternoon, Mrs. Grace organized a gathering for the extended family, claiming it was to celebrate her own son's achievements. But it became a stage for her to ridicule Amara openly, saying she had wasted John's youth, that she was a disgrace to the family, and that she should leave the house before she brought further shame. Amara felt her face burn, her chest tighten, and for a moment, she wondered if she would collapse under the weight of everyone's eyes, their cruel words like daggers. Yet inside, she felt a flicker of something else: determination. She knew she was carrying life, 3 babies whose existence would change everything. And she knew about the money her aunt had left her, money that could help her stand on her own if she ever had to walk away. That night, she whispered to her children, promising them safety, love, and a future in which no one's cruelty could harm them. She imagined herself in years to come, triumphant, holding her babies, running her own business, and proving that her strength was not defined by the insults of others. Even as the trauma lingered and the humiliation of the day settled deep into her bones, she felt the first flickers of hope that her life was not over, that she could survive, and that one day those who called her a failure would see how wrong they had been. Amara knew the journey ahead would be painful, filled with battles of patience and courage, but she also understood that she carried the seeds of revenge, not through violence, but through the quiet power of her hidden fortune, her growing children, and the life she would build for herself, showing everyone that a woman underestimated is a force waiting to rise. As Amara moved into the later months of her pregnancy, she grew increasingly aware of the quiet power she carried within her, and the life inside her womb. Mrs. Grace and her daughters, Linda and Esther, continued their subtle and sometimes blatant mockery, often making comments about how she would never survive childbirth or how she had brought shame to John's family. Yet Amara no longer felt fear as she had before. Each insult became fuel for her patience and determination, and she began to see their cruelty as a sign that she was growing stronger, that they had underestimated her. John remained distant and passive, often avoiding her eyes or giving empty reassurances, which forced Amara to rely fully on herself, on the strength she had cultivated quietly over the years, and on the secret fortune she controlled, which gave her the confidence to plan for her future and the future of her triplets. She spent long nights whispering to her unborn children, telling them they were loved, that no one could diminish their value, and that their mother was preparing a world where they would be safe, empowered, and free from cruelty. Amara began documenting every slight, every insult, and every act of humiliation she suffered, knowing that one day this record would serve as evidence of her endurance, patience, and eventual triumph. Daily life in the Johnson household became a careful exercise in strategy. She completed chores flawlessly, ran errands efficiently, and attended to John with respect, all while silently building her independence. Her plan for revenge through success, and her vision of the life she would create. Small victories sustained her, a meal perfectly prepared, a household task done better than expected, a quiet deflection of an insult without showing anger. She also began expanding her knowledge of business and finance, quietly studying ways to grow her inherited fortune so that it could become a foundation for her independence. The in-laws began to notice subtle changes in her demeanor. She no longer flinched at their words. She held her head high, and there was an undeniable calmness and quiet confidence in her eyes. Though they could not yet understand its source, Amara also found moments of joy, speaking softly to her triplets, feeling their movements, imagining their lives, and teaching them even before birth that strength came from patience, strategy, and the refusal to allow others to define their worth. She imagined a future where she could walk away from the household, her head held high, her children thriving, and her fortune intact, leaving Mrs. Grace and the daughters stunned at the woman they had tried to belittle. Each day, she reminded herself that revenge was not about confrontation, but about creating a life so full of dignity, the success, and empowerment that no one could deny it. Even when fear or exhaustion crept in, she drew strength from the life inside her, from the secret knowledge that she held power they could not imagine, and from the understanding that patience and resilience were the most potent forms of revenge. Amara envisioned the moment when her triplets would be born healthy and strong, when she would rise from humiliation to independence, when Mrs. Grace and her daughters would have no choice but to witness her transformation, and when John would finally recognize her strength and courage, understanding that a woman underestimated is a force that cannot be ignored. And each night, when the household slept, Amara whispered to her unborn children that they were already proof of triumph, that they were already powerful, and that no insult, betrayal, or act of cruelty could ever change the strength she had cultivated in herself for them and for the life she was about to create. By the time Amara entered her 7th month of pregnancy, she had grown stronger in ways no one in the Johnson household could see, quietly building resilience and planning her future while enduring daily humiliation. Mrs. Grace continued her criticisms, scrutinizing everything Amara did, from how she cooked to how she organized the house, while Linda and Esther laughed behind her back, making cruel remarks about her inability to bring honor to the family. But Amara no longer allowed these words to break her spirit. She focused on the life inside her, feeling the kicks of her triplets as constant, reminders that she carried not only new life, but also the power to change her destiny. John remained largely passive, unable to confront his family or protect Amara, leaving her to navigate the household tensions alone. But she learned to rely on her own judgment, her patience, and the fortune she had inherited from her late aunt, investments that were quietly growing and would provide her and her children with independence. Each day became a balancing act. She performed her chores perfectly, maintained a polite demeanor in front of the in-laws, and smiled at their insults, all while secretly planning the steps she would take once her children were born, knowing that revenge could come in the form of success, dignity, and the ability to walk away from those who had belittled her. Amara began imagining her life outside the household, picturing small businesses, independent income, and the freedom to raise her children without fear of judgment or humiliation. At night, she whispered to her triplets, telling them they were loved, their mother would always protect them, and that they were already powerful, even before entering the world. She also began documenting every insult, every cruel laugh, every public humiliation she had endured, knowing that this record would someday serve as a reminder of her strength and resilience, proof that she had survived and would thrive despite the cruelty of her in-laws. The household dynamics began to shift subtly. Mrs. Grace noticed Amara's calm confidence, the way she no longer flinched at insults, and the quiet determination in her eyes, or she could not comprehend its source. Linda and Esther also began to show signs of doubt, glances of envy replacing laughter, subtle questions replacing mocking whispers, as if they sensed that the woman they had tried to destroy was preparing to rise above them. Amara carefully nurtured these changes without revealing the full extent of her plans, knowing that patience and timing would amplify the impact of her eventual triumph. She spent long hours preparing for the future, planning finances, managing her secret fortune, and thinking of ways to secure a life for her children where they would never feel powerless or humiliated. Every kick, every movement of her triplets strengthened her resolve, reminding her that she was carrying not only life, but also the promise of justice and victory over those who had wronged her. She dreamed of the day she would leave the household with her children, her fortune, and her dignity intact. Watching Mrs. Grace and her daughters realize that the woman they had mocked had become unstoppable, that their cruelty had only fueled her rise, and that patience, resilience, and strategic planning were more powerful than ridicule or control. Each night, Amara whispered to her unborn children that they were living proof that endurance and courage could transform betrayal into triumph, that they were destined for greatness, and that their mother's quiet strength would shape a future filled with love, security, and undeniable power, leaving all who doubted her amazed at the woman she had become. The day Amara went into labor was filled with pain, fear, and quiet determination. Even that morning, Mrs. Grace and her daughters, Linda and Esther, had continued their mocking, questioning whether she could survive childbirth, making cruel remarks about her swollen belly, whispering that a woman like her would fail at everything. But Amara had learned to shut out their voices and focus entirely on the life inside her in the future. She was determined to claim. In the hospital, she held John's hand, though he remained distant, unsure of what to say or do, leaving her to rely fully on herself and the inner strength that had been growing with her triplets, and with the knowledge of the hidden fortune she controlled. Each contraction reminded her of the years she had endured humiliation, the endless days of scorn from her mother-in-law and sisters-in-law, and the nights she had cried alone while planning a future in which she would rise above them. The nurses noticed her composure, her quiet dignity even amid exhaustion and pain, and Amara silently promised her babies that she would protect them, that they would be loved, and that no one's cruelty would define them or their mother. Hours passed, the pain intensified, but Amara pushed through, imagining the faces of Mrs. Grace, Linda, and Esther, picturing their surprise and disbelief when they realized that the woman they had scorned had not only survived, but had brought 3 perfect lives into the world, a living testament to their underestimation and a quiet declaration of her resilience. Finally, she gave birth to 3 healthy babies, each one wailing loudly, filling the room with life and marking the beginning of a new chapter in which humiliation would be replaced by empowerment. Amara named her triplets with care and love, each name a promise of courage, perseverance, and triumph over adversity. In holding them close, she felt the weight of years of ridicule lift, replaced by quiet satisfaction and anticipation of the life she would now build. Returning home was tense. Mrs. Grace attempted to maintain control, offering unsolicited advice on feeding and care, while Linda and Esther made small comments meant to wound. But Amara remained calm, polite, and confident, her every word and action demonstrating the inner power they had failed to see. She began asserting her independence through her fortune, making small business investments, hiring trustworthy helpers, and creating plans for the future, all while maintaining patience and humility in front of the in-laws, who could not yet imagine the scope of her plans. John, now aware of the depth of her strength, began showing signs of respect, though guilt and passivity weighed on him. And Amara carefully set boundaries, ensuring that she and her children would be safe from further cruelty. Slowly, the household dynamic shifted. Whispers of envy replaced laughter, glances of doubt replaced mockery. And the in-laws sensed, though could not understand, that Amara had grown into a force they could not control. Each night, she nurtured her triplets, whispering lessons of patience, endurance, and strength, teaching them through example that betrayal could be overcome with resilience, strategy, and self-belief. And that revenge was not about confrontation, but about building a life of dignity, power, and independence. Amara envisioned walking away one day, her children thriving, her fortune secured, her head held high, leaving Mrs. Grace and her daughters stunned and silent, witnessing the woman they had mocked become unstoppable. And every night, when the world was quiet, she whispered to her babies that they were miracles, not just because they lived, but because they symbolized victory over cruelty, proof that a woman underestimated and humiliated could rise to triumph through patience, determination, and love, leaving all who doubted her astonished at the force she had become. After months of planning, patience, and quiet endurance, Amara finally began to step fully into her power, determined to create the life she and her triplets deserved, free from humiliation, ridicule. In control by Mrs. Grace, Linda, and Esther, she had grown stronger with every insult, every whispered word, every mocking glance. And now the fruits of her resilience and strategy were beginning to show. Her small business ventures were flourishing, her fortune growing steadily, and she had built a network of friends and supporters who respected her strength and encouraged her independence. At home, she began asserting boundaries firmly but calmly, making it clear that cruelty, judgment, or interference would no longer be tolerated. And slowly, the atmosphere in the Johnson household began to change. Mrs. Grace tried to regain control through subtle manipulation, but Amara responded with dignity, patience, and quiet confidence, showing without words that she was no longer the frightened, passive woman they had once mocked. Linda and Esther watched her with envy and growing respect, unable to understand how the same woman they had humiliated could now carry herself with such power, composure, and command, and their attempts to provoke her no longer succeeded, only reinforcing Amara's sense of strength. She focused on her triplets, nurturing them with love, teaching them through actions and words about resilience, patience, and courage, and showing them that betrayal, cruelty, and humiliation could be transformed into wisdom and determination. John, seeing the transformation of his wife, began to respect her fully, realizing the depth of her endurance and the intelligence behind her planning. And though he carried guilt for his earlier passivity, he also began to support her decisions, allowing Amara to guide their household and children with confidence. Amara's businesses expanded further. She opened a small boutique, managed her investments, and even started an online store, proving to herself and others that her fortune, her skill, and her determination could secure her family's future independently. With each passing day, she saw the results of her patience. Whispers of envy from her in-laws became hesitant questions. Mocking laughter turned to cautious observation, and subtle glances revealed that they recognized her as a force they could not intimidate. At night, she would hold her triplets close, watching them sleep, feeling their tiny hands, and imagining the lives they would lead strong, empowered, and unafraid, with a mother who had turned betrayal and trauma into triumph. She reminded herself that her revenge was not in confrontation or anger, but in creating a life of dignity, success, and independence, showing through her actions that underestimating her had been their greatest mistake. Amara envisioned the day when she could walk away from the household entirely if she chose, her children thriving, her fortune secure, and her head held high, leaving Mrs. Grace, Linda, and Esther in stunned silence, witnessing the woman they had humiliated rise above every insult, every betrayal, and every attempt to control her. She took joy in the small victories, managing her finances wisely, expanding her boutique, mentoring other women who had suffered humiliation and betrayal, in creating a home filled with love, laughter, and safety for her children. Every night, she whispered to her triplets that they were miracles, not only for surviving, but for representing strength, courage, and the transformation of pain into empowerment, teaching them that endurance, patience, and strategic planning were the greatest tools for overcoming cruelty. Amara had learned to forgive herself for the moments of doubt, to channel her anger into action, and to embrace the power she held quietly, and in doing so, she became a living testament to resilience, showing that even the deepest betrayal and humiliation could be transformed into triumph. As she watched her children grow, played with them, and prepared for the future, she smiled. Knowing she had achieved what she once thought impossible, she had turned every insult into motivation, every betrayal into a lesson, and every obstacle into a stepping stone toward independence, proving that a woman underestimated, humiliated, and betrayed can rise to create a life of unstoppable strength, love, and success, leaving everyone who doubted her astonished and powerless before the force she had become.